This fall, a ton of discussion has been erupting about the transformation of video games from single-purchase products to these never-ending money generators. And unfortunately, for many gamers out there who hate the practice, it seems to be becoming the norm moving forward for the industry. The new vernacular for this business model? Games as a service. A number of publishers are now on record in the past few months about their love for games as a service, saying it's going to be the focus of their entire business models in the years ahead, including some really big names: Take-Two, EA, Ubisoft. Since all of this has been in the public eye lately, we thought we would take a look at the path of how we got to this point and what problems and developments created all of this mess in the first place. So strap in for a history lesson. There are a variety of factors that contributed to the current games as a service model, and a lot of reasons for why this is becoming the best, and we use that term very loosely, path for developers to not only make back their development budgets, but also make additional loads of money. Now, like we've pointed out in our last video about the origins of DLC, the games as a service model is actually quite reminiscent of the early days of the arcade. You want to keep playing? You keep putting in more money. Only in today's cases, you pay a full $60 or more before you do all that. A lot of that business model went away with the advent of the home console and gaming on personal computers, which allowed for consumers to purchase full games to play at home. However, the bloat of gaming budgets over the next 20 to 30 years meant developers had to find ways to bring in additional money after the fact. We've talked about that in a few other videos too. You should check that out. We'll put those in the end card. Anyway, these ideas to make more money have evolved over time. In the PC world, they took the form of massive expansions that typically cost about half the price of the original game. But the adoption of high-speed internet and the limits of hard drive space made that a little bit harder on console initially. Until, interestingly enough, Microsoft had an idea that they implemented on the Xbox 360. In the days of the original Xbox, many Microsoft titles experimented with expansions, Halo 2 for instance. But with the Xbox 360, Microsoft led the idea of smaller, more meaningful pieces of content for an additional price. Rather than these huge $20 to $30 expansions, they believed gamers might be more likely to purchase small pieces of content ranging up to, say, $5, to the point where they even devoted an entire section of the Xbox 360 marketplace solely to DLC. It might sound a little bit silly to us now to think about that, but at the time, no one else was thinking like that. It was new. Believe it or not, Microsoft touted this as a big benefit of the Xbox 360. They even coined the beloved term, microtransactions. A 2005 Wired article described this as, when Microsoft releases the new version of its video game console, presumably this year, it plans to include a storefront that will offer microtransactions. The idea is that everyone wins. Players with disposable income can spend a few cents here and there to enhance their gameplay, and publishers get a way to create a continuing revenue stream. At the time, they estimated that this could make a whopping $5 million in additional revenue per game, which, well, that's a far cry from the hundreds of millions that publishers are making from the model now. While there have been other examples of microtransactions prior to that, this was when one of the platform holders really decided to swing for the fences with it. One of the reasons people shied away from it before was because of credit card fees. Selling something for $1 online cost you almost as much in transaction fees, which is why Microsoft had the brilliant idea of selling Microsoft points in bulk, a practice that just about everyone, down to the publisher, now practices. There were some other benefits there as well, like when you were spending points, you forgot they were real money, and that actually applies to a lot of microtransactions today. You buy a virtual currency that doesn't line up with dollar amounts, and you forget exactly how much you're spending. There were, of course, some hiccups with the early attempts at microtransactions, but also some big successes, and in some cases, both at the same time. Bethesda was totally lampooned for the horse armor in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Well, but guess what? That actually sold really, really well. By 2009, it was one of their top pieces of content on the Xbox 360 store. So, silly as it was, it gave proof to the model for other publishers to follow. But over time, there were some obvious limits to DLC. One, it became pretty clear that gamers had certain price thresholds, and two, the timeline of producing DLC. Typically, game code goes gold and the game ships well before people actually get their hands on it. As such, many times DLC would be put onto a disc, which naturally led to a lot of major complaints from gamers. They felt the same way if the DLC was left off the disc but released on day one, because it meant that all of that had been developed before the gamers even got their hands on the game, and gamers felt it should have been in the initial asking price. That presented a problem for when DLC could be produced and shipped because of another thing that happened during those same years, the boom of the used game market. For reference, GameStop shares hit their peak right around 2008, and used games have always been one of their biggest earners. This prompted publishers to adopt new tactics because, well, gamers are turning around their games and trading them in before more content could be produced and released, and the publishers not only saw no money from those used sales, but probably didn't keep those used sales on buying more stuff. Enter the Season Pass. The idea is pretty simple: get gamers on the hook for their money early on to help slow the tide of trading games in, which would also help subsidize future costs for the game. Interestingly enough, LA Noire was one of the first major games to offer this type of model back in 2011, courtesy of the Rockstar Pass that gave players access to new missions within a few months of the game's release. However, there is an inherent problem with this particular strategy. One IDC analyst recently put it this way in regards to season passes: there's a law of diminishing returns when you offer it that way, and if there's a multiplayer aspect to it, the pool of actual gamers gets smaller and smaller and smaller. If you're restricted to playing with other players that have bought that map pack, it eventually becomes a bad investment to keep putting it out. So rather than something gamers spent a sum of money on, large or small, at one fixed point in time down the line, what they really needed to do was something gamers could continue to buy, well, constantly. And around the same time, who was showing the best way to make that happen? Mobile and free-to-play games, both of which were making some huge gains in Asian marketplaces. Some of that is due to some cultural factors. Part of the reason PC bongs are so popular is because quite a few gamers can afford high-end PCs, meaning that free games are a bit more attractive to certain portions of the audience. As that model started to grow, one of the best ways to game money out of players was through, well, you guessed it, mechanics like randomized items in mystery boxes. Those tactics slowly started to make their way to more free-to-play games between 2007 to 2010, with some of the most high-profile titles being games like Team Fortress 2, Star Trek Online, and social apps like Farmville. Once people started to observe that this was making money in free-to-play spaces, yeah, you can bet they were going to try it in full-price AAA games as well. One of the big turning points that helped popularize this in modern shooters was actually Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 producer Jesse Houston said to Rolling Stone in a really great piece about the history of loot boxes, multiplayer at the time was a very cost-heavy and very expensive thing, and we wanted to find a nice way of basically offsetting that cost in a way that felt really good for the player. According to Houston, they actually worked with the FIFA Ultimate Team group at EA to craft these microtransactions in a way that didn't feel too invasive for the players. He went on to say, there was a ton of inspiration between our two teams that we passed back and forth. We loved the magic card feeling and the feeling that you're constantly getting value. And from there, the floodgates pretty much opened. We now see similar mechanics employed in most major shooters, and everything from the RAQ pack seen in Halo 5 to supply drops in Call of Duty, gear packs in Gears of War 4. But over the years, a lot of these have been just seen as a periphery way to make money. The game that really helped cement all that and brought loot boxes to full-price AAA masses was Overwatch. Obviously, plenty of other popular games have run the model very successfully. Counter-Strike Go comes to mind, for example, but not necessarily at the scale of Overwatch, which made Blizzard $1 billion in less than a year. And so here we are today, with loot boxes even infiltrating our single-player games. But never content and always hungry, publishers are always going to be looking for the next iteration of this, because if you can get a certain amount of money from each gamer, or at least from a big enough subset of them each month, you're essentially turning that game into a subscription service, which is likely the next evolution of this. In a recent talk, EA's CFO Blake Jorgensen said that you can turn this model into an uncapped subscription. He said, if you have a live service component to games on EA Access and Origins Access, you can have a subscription that's uncapped. Give people a way to spend money on things they want to do and that they enjoy doing, versus simply capping them at $9 or $10 per month, and that's all they can ever spend. We find people play twice as many games, they spend twice as long on them, and they spend twice as much money because you've reduced the cost of trial to close to zero. So here we are, and that's our breakdown of how we've arrived at this place. It is kind of understandable to see how we got to games as a service, although maybe a little bit convoluted. The next next question is what form this will take next for gamers and publishers. Right now, both groups are caught in a bit of a tug of war. When it's fun, it's undeniable. Gamers don't actually seem to have that big of a problem with it, especially if they don't feel like it's impacting their gameplay experience in a negative way to have that paywall there. But when it's wrong, gamers definitely feel like they're being milked, as we've seen in recent weeks with the reaction to loot boxes and other microtransactions. Does this mean we'll see standalone games go away completely with only services offered in their place? No, it really doesn't. While some publishers like EA, who we've mentioned several times in this video already, are actually entertaining that route, it's pretty safe to say we're always gonna have the same types of games we've always enjoyed. There will always be someone out there to make them, maybe not at the same scale, but the same types of games will live on. As always, keep supporting what you love, because at the end of the day, money is going to be the thing that drives most of these decisions. So support the developers and the development practices you want to see in the world. All right, that caps off our big look at the timeline of how we got to games as a service as the current trend in AAA video games. What do you guys think? Let us know if we missed anything and what your thoughts are in the comments. And for more gaming news and features, remember to like this video. If you're new to this channel, subscribe to the know. There are a variety of factors that contributed to the current games as a service model, and a lot of the reasons for why this is becoming the best, and we use that term very, very loosely, path for developers to not only make their money back, but their damn. Blah, blah, blah.